I would like to add some more information because as much negotiations and meetings with Arab leaders and Arab countries that have been made already during this 1 year, we haven't done before in our history so fast and so tight. So in addition to the speech of President Zelensky at the Arab League summit, he met with the Crown Prince, Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, held meetings with the heads of delegations of the United Arab Emirates, the Sultanate of Oman, and the State of Kuwait. The participants of the meeting discussed issues of global food security and the work of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The parties agreed on the exchange of delegations to achieve concrete results and cooperation. The President of Ukraine also held a meeting with Prime Minister of Iraq, Mohammad Shia Sabar al-Sadani. I want to add some very fresh information about the resumption of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran and the challenge for this region. And we understand that somehow more or less Russian Federation have a huge interest in this continuation of diplomatic ties. And from this point of view, will it be helpful for what I've read right now about the help of Arab world towards stopping war in Ukraine, or it will be just on contrary, the situation that will somehow may ruin our plans on our tie connections with the Middle East?
Okay, so let me start first with the obvious. Ukraine's place as a young democracy that is fighting back for its land, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and freedom, most of all. The place is clearly within a coalition of democratic, like-minded, free, that includes, the NATO, hopefully at some point, and the EU. Okay, but also there are like some alliances outside of Europe that includes countries like Japan, South Africa, South Korea, not South Africa, and others beyond that. So that's one. Then next, there's the Middle East. So the Middle East is a mixed picture, right? It cannot be talked at as one state, or because they don't have a common foreign policy, a common defense policy, a common security policy. Actually, it's very contradictory, and rivalries there, as you mentioned, Saudi versus Iran is a very intense rivalry. So this is where Ukraine can have like some tactical alliances and some also moral and ethical support, because it is the victimized side, the side that is facing an aggression, a side that is facing a colonialism basically in the 21st century in Europe. So that bit is quite important, and in that dimension, you will see, for example, Saudi versus Iran rivalry. So the natural stance for Saudi is, as I mentioned before, like regimes that are very similar to each other in terms of the ways of rule. But then there is Iran. Iran is also an ally of Russia. And in that dimension is the rivalries here will take the best of the state behavior, in the sense that what you saw is on one end fear of further Iranian expansion. Iran is getting now is handing over drones, loitering munitions, perhaps ammunition in terms of artillery and rocket launchers to Russia, and getting instead also some technology, perhaps some Western weapons, to do some reverse engineering to be able to produce Iranian versions of these weapons, and so on. So it's expanding its influence. And Iran and Saudi were contestants at least in 5-6 countries in the Middle East. So in Lebanon, Iran has the upper hand via Hezbollah. In Yemen, Iran had the upper hand, at least in the north, via Ansarullah / the Houthis. in Iraq, it also had a much stronger allies than those of Saudi inside Iraq. And in other places as well, such as in Syria, it supported the regime with Russia, and the regime prevailed in the end. Whereas Saudi and other countries supported the armed opposition, and the armed opposition disintegrated to a large degree. So overall, Iran was doing well in the region, and so Saudi needs to get more allies, and this is where I think Ukraine would fit well. So that's one issue, the issue of security and defense in the region. The other issue has to do with the food security, as you mentioned. The war and Ukraine, being one of the largest exporters of grain products in the world, has affected some of the poorest countries in the Middle East, including countries like Yemen and Sudan, who are already suffering from major security issues and pretty much a civil war situation in both countries. And then, add to that the food insecurity. So some of the relief will need de-escalation in Ukraine. And then finally, Iran being, as I said, the spearheading in a sense, or advancing certainly because of its way of warfare is very complex. But then there are the small states like Qatar, Kuwait, others, and those a state like Kuwait was subjected to an invasion by its neighbor, Iraq, a stronger neighbor, a larger neighbor. And sees and looks at Ukraine and sees itself, in a way, itself in the 90s. We're being attacked by the larger, stronger, aggressive neighbor, and NATO is in the back of Ukraine. Europe is backing Ukraine, supporting Ukraine. So they're watching this very carefully, because if the odds were against Ukraine, or the outcome is against Ukraine, then I think these small states would not like to see that, because they will be in big trouble, being small, being rich, and therefore being targets by stronger neighbors. They're surrounded by bigger and stronger neighbors. So they would put themselves in the position of Ukraine and make sure that the aggressor doesn't get away with whatever they've done. So these are I think the main issues: security, defense, energy, and food, that affects directly the Middle East.
Some experts say that we are observing the exchange of the powerful, influential parties in this region. Before, it was mostly the United States. And now we're observing the exchange of this influence in the region by China. And from what you said right now, and taking into account this exchange of powerful countries in the region, will Saudi Arabia and other small countries be able to balance between understanding the problems of European continent and the tragedy of the war in Ukraine, and on the other hand, balancing between the interests of their own region and the allies that's forming right now before our eyes? Will it really have the opportunity to balance?
We have to wait and see. This is not the first. So we're talking about so China's initiative is basically a de-escalation initiative that led to some cooperative, less hostile behavior between Saudi and Iran. But that's fundamentally the choice of the leadership. Iran has been asking for a while for a de-escalation, but you ask for de-escalation because you're winning. When you're losing, this is when you don't want de-escalation, because the status quo is against you. You're not winning in that fight. But then there was a leadership decision in Saudi to de-escalate with some initiative from the Chinese side. So this is not the first de-escalation initiative that I've seen in the Middle East. There are hundreds of them. They usually don't last long, to be fair and completely honest. Even peace agreements. I mean, not just in the Middle East, but globally, we have the stats show us that only 16% of conflicts ended up in a peace agreement, and 37% of this 16% collapse in 2 years. So it's not we just have an initiative so far. So we'll wait and see. The issues between Iran and Saudi are more complex, I think, to be resolved via one initiative. But again, I don't want to be a pessimist. We'll have to wait and see on that one.
Okay, let's. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's it. In terms of shifting alliances in the Middle East, probably the longest alliance you've seen in the Middle East in terms of at least it's a manageable alliance. You know, it's not an alliance of convenience, but it's an alliance of interest, if you wish. So that would have been the Gulf countries, the GCC, and the United States. I mean, the United States intervened 1991, you know, in an actual war to save basically Kuwait first and then Saudi behind it, because they would have been the next target of aggression. And then multiple times as well in that sense lately by providing weapons, you know, and for Saudi for their air defenses, basically. Not that it was that effective. So in that sense, this is a very long post 1946 alliance that has been going on, ebbs and flows, goes up and down. But it's maintained. Also, the U.S. is still there. The U.S. has bases in Kuwait, in Qatar, in Bahrain, and elsewhere in the Middle East. China so far doesn't. So, in terms of the defense and the security, and many of the diplomatic and economic history, there are still strong ties, very well rooted in the Middle East between the US on one end and the rest of the region. But again, there's room for change because alliance shifts all the time.